The Iran war is hitting Gulf Arab nations hard, with a wider impact in today's interlinked world. As well as global oil and gas supplies, Gulf states play a critical role in many economies. So how are they connected, and what could be at risk? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm James Bays. The impact of the decision by the US and Israel to attack Iran is reverberating around the world. Gulf Arab states are right in the middle of things, not just geographically, but economically too. Their importance as a global energy supply source is being felt by all, with higher oil and gas prices. But that's only part of the story. The Gulf's economic significance lies well beyond oil and gas. It's a major producer of other products too. Take helium, for example, widely used in medicine and technology. Dubai, Abu Dhabi and Doha are global transit hubs for people and goods. Then there's the Gulf's nations' financial firepower, evident in investment worldwide. So how serious are the implications of the war on all of this? And could there be long-term damage? We'll talk to our panel of guests in just a moment. But first, this report from Laura Khan.
A stark warning from Gulf countries. The Iran war is already disrupting supplies of food, medicine and fuel globally, and it's set to get worse.
This systematic escalation has affected the international economy immediately. Prices have risen, the costs of transportation have risen, and the Strait of Hormuz is almost closed, which affects navigation. Supply chains are also affected, and they must be protected. This is a joint international responsibility.
Iran's nearly total blockade of the Strait of Hormuz has highlighted the vital industrial and logistical roles the Gulf plays in the global economy. The region's importance to energy supplies is evident in the current market volatility. But another knock-on effect is the interruption to shipments of helium, critical in the medical field, especially for magnetic resonance imaging, MRI technology. Qatar produces 1/3 of the world's supplies. Its liquefied natural gas plants generate liquid helium, but Iranian attacks have knocked out 17% of its export capacity. The Gulf is also a major transport corridor. Logistics companies such as United Arab Emirates-owned DP World operates ports on several continents. But the war has disrupted air traffic, forcing airlines such as Qatar Airways, Etihad and Emirates to limit flights that connect Asia, Europe and Africa. This week, a drone strike on fuel tanks in Kuwait's international airport triggered fires. Attacks on critical energy facilities have hampered production and forced shutdowns, while strikes on data centres have damaged some Amazon Web Services in the region. And then there's finance. Sovereign wealth funds from the UAE, Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, and the Qatar Investment Authority pour trillions of dollars into infrastructure, real estate, and technology around the world. For decades, the skylines in the Gulf have been a symbol of wealth, drawing workers and tourists alike. Now those buildings are under attack. And the attacks are not just shutting down critical systems. They're also exposing the vulnerability of the global system that depends on them. Laura Khan for Inside Story, Al Jazeera.
So, complicated issues concerning the global economy, energy security and much more. To make sense of it all, let's bring in our guests today. And joining me here in the studio, Nikolay, Kozjharnov, Research Associate Professor in Energy Security at the Gulf Studies Centre at Qatar University. In Bern, in Switzerland, Cornelia Meyer, a macroeconomist and oil and gas specialist. And in Edinburgh, Torbjorn Soltvedt, an Associate Director and Principal Middle East Analyst at the global risk intelligence company Verisk Maplecroft. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us. Nikolay, let me start with you. We've reached the 1 month mark now in this war, and the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz has been there for that time. How worried should we all be about the global economy?
Well, we definitely should be worried because I guess the main problems are still ahead if this conflict continues. Because right now the economy is still managing to soften certain negative impacts and fallouts of this conflict using the reserves and trying to find the ways to bypass the emerging troubles with the transportation of goods. But what we definitely can say now that this conflict put an end to any discussions on whether the Gulf economies are diversified or not. Because usually we are thinking about them as about oil and gas exporters, but now they clearly showed that they are an inseparable part of the global petrochemical industry, which is extremely dependent on the feedstock coming from the Gulf. They also show that they are quite important as a transportation hub and also as the countries that are determining in many ways the food security. We should not forget about the fertilizers that these countries were exporting to the external markets. Basically, the exclusion from this trade might put quite a lot of countries in danger.
Okay, Cornelia, lots of sectors there, and we'll go through them during the programme. But just a big picture comment from you first. I mean, where we are now after a month, is the damage going to be lasting for the global economy? And how much worse could it get if, for example, this goes on another month?
Well, it's certainly going to be there for some time. And it's going to get worse the longer it lasts. Because look at it, some of the production facilities have been degraded. Qatar LNG has been affected by a strike that put it down 17%, and sort of made it very hard for its expansion program. That will take 2 to 5 years to rebuild. Other installations, the IEA says 40 installations in 6 countries have been hit. So we only know how bad that is once hostilities are over. But in the meantime, you have major supply disruptions. You mentioned fertilizer. You mentioned also we look at products. We look at kerosene. There's real shortage of kerosene. Right now, Asia bears the brunt of it because more than 80% of oil, gas and products going through the Straits go to Asia. But let us not forget, Asia has big refining capacity, and some of these products, kerosene and so on, will then be shipped to Europe. So in some time, Europe will feel it too. So yes, this is big. The IEA says it's the biggest disruption in history, it's, I would compare it to COVID, although it is not a demand shock, it's a supply shock, which in many ways is harder. It's harder for supply to come back than for demand to come back.
Torbjorn, Cornelia there saying Asia hit first, and for example, the Philippines has declared a national energy emergency. We've seen panic buying at the pumps in Australia. What's interesting, though, in the US, which has a degree of energy independence, the gas price, what they call petrol, has shot up. A gallon of gas, that's about 3.7 litres for people who measure it in a different way in the rest of the world, now costs about $4. That's a 34% rise since the war started. Nowhere is immune, is it?
No, absolutely. And you mentioned the fact that we're coming up to the 1 month mark of this conflict now, and that's really significant. If we think about the ripple effects, we saw first that countries in South Asia were very affected, then Southeast Asia, then East Asia. Now we're seeing Europe and the US as well. And if you think about the time it takes for a tanker to move from say the Persian Gulf with feedstock to a refinery, say in Japan or China, it's about 3 to 4 weeks. So we're reaching that point now. And of course, before the outbreak of the conflict, we saw that a lot of the producers in the region, they were worried about conflict and potential disruption. They were trying essentially to get ahead of any conflict-related disruption, and so they front-loaded a lot of exports. And so that has helped mitigate some of the impact. But now, those cargoes have been delivered. Now we're seeing there's very little in the way of new cargoes coming from the Persian Gulf. And it's really now in the next few weeks that we will start to see much more significant price rises for consumers. We're going to see shortages for certain critical components like plastics. Packaging could become an issue. When you put all of this together, packaging, fuel costs, fertilizers, that all points towards more expensive food, more expensive energy, and generally speaking, just higher inflation around the world.
Nikolay, talk of those ripple effects, the knock-on effects. I mean, if these people, for example, in the US, are having to pay so much more for their gas, and that's countries all around the world, then those people aren't able to spend money on other things they would have done, like eating out, like food, like entertainment. And then you have not just petrol, you have diesel costs, which is a lot of the trucks around the world, which are obviously used to transport agricultural produce and the like. This is just going to reverberate, is it not?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the conflict with which we are dealing right now and its impact on the economy is quite unprecedented. As it was mentioned, it's affecting not simply like the demand side that we could see, for instance, during the beginning of the Russian-Ukrainian war, but it's affecting the whole chain from the production to transportation and consumption. So, first of all, the reason why I say this conflict is dangerous in time, and time is not playing in our interest, is because it's affecting directly the supply side. So those volumes of oil, gas, and other materials that were coming from the Gulf, they are now in danger, and the resources, the stocks are depleting. That could help us to mitigate. But also we are facing problems related with the transportation. The security of the transportation is becoming an important factor with the rising cost of this transportation on the top. So the rerouting of the materials coming to the Gulf or out of the Gulf is already giving an extra expenses, in addition to the danger that is still represented posed to this transportation by Iran and its proxies in the region. And finally, as you mentioned, the consumers. So we definitely will see changing behavior in those countries that are dependent on the petrochemical production. We will see changes in those countries that are extremely sensitive to the cost of the inputs, and definitely the behavior of the households will finally put the pressure on the global economy on the top. And from this point of view, the main important point here is that the time is playing against us, as opposed to the previous conflicts, where actually time was in favor of redistribution of the supplies and stabilization. Now we are not seeing this happening.
Cornelia, I mean, Saudi Arabia is clearly one of the very key players here. It is managing to get crude oil out through a pipeline, its back door, in effect, which is the port of Yanbu on the Red Sea. There is an even worse case scenario, isn't there? Because the Houthis there, at the moment, they're letting that oil go and those shipments go. But some are worried that they may get pressure from Iran to actually stop that route as well.
Well, let us pray that this is not happening. When I look at it, Saudi Arabia was very, very wise. 40 years ago, they started to think of how dependent are we on the Strait of Hormuz, and they started building that pipeline. It has a capacity of about 7 million barrels a day. 2 million go to the refinery in Yanbu, and 5 million would be dedicated to exports. Right now, they're putting about 3.5 million through. These are not light switches. So that's good. But, I look at that, then I look at the 1.5 million barrels a day that can go through the pipeline in UAE from the oil fields to Fujairah, to the Gulf of Oman. And then I'm looking at a very small pipeline, which can put another extra 300,000 barrels a day from the Kurdish region of Iraq to Turkey. But together that gives us around 6, maybe maximum 6 million barrels a day, and we're talking of a shortfall of about 20 million barrels a day in terms of crude and product. So it's good that this exists, but it's way not enough. So it goes to show how dependent dependent. The world is on that narrow waterway on the Bab el on Hormuz. The one thing I just would like to add, the thing that worries me most is fertilizer, because we can live without, using a car. We can live with many things, but we need food, and this is a critical time. This is springtime when farmers are sowing the crop. So in autumn we will know how much less the yield will be because they didn't get enough fertilizer. Food will become very expensive. Transportation of food will become very expensive. The OECD economies, they will be able to manage. Yes, the people will feel it in their pockets, but somehow they will manage. I'm worried about the developing world. What about the Burkina Fasos of this world? Will they have enough food, or will we see hunger?
Torbjorn, I think this is interesting because I think many people around the world knew about the oil and gas. They had a view, I think, of the Gulf, particularly of the biggest city in the region, Dubai, through the lens of social media influencers as a place of glamour and glitz. But they are now learning it's not just about that and about the oil of gas. It is things like fertilizer. Tell us a little bit more about that. One of the big producers is where I am right now, Qatar, very big producer of nitrogen fertilizer. I understand that 500,000 corn farmers in the US depend on that.
Absolutely. Fertilizer is a critical area in terms of global supply. Urea, you're talking about a third of global supply. Urea, one of the most commonly used fertilizers around the world. As we've just heard, in terms of farmers around the world, this impact is going to vary considerably. I've spoken with farmers in the UK. They've said that they've secured supplies of fertilizers for this planting seasons, but in other parts of the world, they're just coming into their planting seasons. These disruptions that we're seeing now is going to start to hit them very, very quickly. So for a lot of African farmers, agricultural producers in Africa, this is a huge problem. And that is something that we're seeing kind of more broadly as well when we look at which countries are more vulnerable to all these disruptions. If you look at the oil and gas side, if you look at Asian countries where the dependency on the region is biggest, for some countries like Pakistan, which have the highest absolute dependence on the Gulf, we're talking about 95% of oil and gas imports coming from the Persian Gulf in the case of Pakistan. If you compare that with a country like China, it's slightly lower. You're talking about 40%. But then you also have to take into account the competition that is happening in the market. We're now seeing a bidding war for whether that's fertilizer cargoes or LNG cargoes, oil cargoes. So some countries are obviously in a better position to outbid other countries. Singapore has less of an absolute reliance on oil and gas imports from the Middle East than some other countries in the region. But again, they're able to make up for some of that shortfall by securing cargoes. And we're seeing a lot of cargoes around the world headed for one country, and then they're being rerouted to another because we're seeing there aren't enough cargoes on the market at the moment to go around. And so this is why we're starting to see prices being pushed up and some countries facing pretty drastic measures in terms of trying to bring down demand. And we're seeing a real kind of demand destruction in some cases, especially in South and Southeast Asia.
Nikolay, there are other key commodities as well. Perhaps you can run through some of them. For example, aluminium or aluminum, if you're an American, sulfur and helium. Helium is not about party balloons, we learn.
Oh, absolutely. As it was mentioned, it's an important part of the medical services here. We should also remember about the plastics. According to different estimations, this region is responsible of up to 30% of plastics produced in the world. So basically, each of us has a pen here on the table, and one of us has it made from the Gulf materials. So, which means that the global economy also should be prepared for the lack of the very key, very basic materials for its functioning. Not to say that I'm definitely concerned with the way how these countries of the GCC will be seen in the long run, because right now they are demonstrating that they are not a safe haven for industry anymore. And according to their plans and according to their future strategies, they were quite interested in deeper diversification of their economies and in deeper integration exactly within the petrochemical industry as important sources of the feedstock for the global economy. Right now, after this conflict, I guess there will be a serious revision on the side of the traditional consumers, whether they should be reliant on these countries or not. So, which means that quite a lot of the diversification plans will be put under the big question.
And Cornelia, those plans included and already in place logistics hubs, data centres, and this region, very, very important for transport and aviation. 3 of the very big global airlines, super carriers, Qatar Airways in Doha, Emirates in Dubai, and Etihad in Abu Dhabi. And in terms of aviation, there's a sort of double whammy, isn't there? Because there's that, those carriers have got a reduced service, now slowly returning capacity, but also jet fuel for the rest of the aviation industry is impacted.
Jet fuel is extremely impacted, and it's very, I mean, it's really skyrocketed. And Europe will also see, because Europe imports a lot of its jet fuel from Asia. So, you know, if the refineries don't get the crude, they won't make the jet fuel, and so then Europe will also be affected. But you're right. Look, I look at DXB. Dubai is number 1 in international passenger transfer. It's number 11 in terms of freight. Doha is number 10 in terms of passengers and number 8 in terms of freight. So these are very, very important nodes for traffic. And you saw that the prices from 10% of everybody going from Europe to Asia has to pass through these hubs. And you see that tickets have gone up from Australia to Europe between 40 and 80%, and in some cases more than 200%. So yes, big inflationary impact. Just one thing, I think the Gulf economies may be a little bit more resilient. The question is, will investment flow back? But I just saw a BlackRock investment back into the Emirates of 250 million, I think. So I think we, in the end, we won't get around the Gulf, and we won't get. This is 20% of oil and oil products, 20% of LNG. We won't get around it. And I think my previous speaker was right. The competition, especially for LNG cargoes from the US between Asia and Europe, will be absolutely brutal.
Torbjorn, there's no sign of an end to the war right now. President Trump seems to be allowing a 10 days or so room for diplomacy, but no sign that it's coming to an end. But let me ask you this question. If it was to end right now, how quickly could things go back to normal?
Well, I think at this stage, we're certainly talking about months, not weeks, and perhaps that is an optimistic outlook. It's going to depend, commodity by commodity. The most concerning one, as we already heard, is probably LNG, because of the significant damage that's been inflicted on some critical infrastructure in Qatar, some LNG trains. Repairing that damage is going to take many months, maybe even years. So in terms of the additional supply that was expected from Qatar, that now looks very different over the coming years. For oil, again, we're probably talking about months. We've seen, especially in Iraq, that some of the largest oil fields have been shut down. So, once that happens, restarting those, that is probably, again, a question of months rather than weeks. Kuwait is another country that has been forced to shut down production in some oil fields. We've seen that Saudi Arabia, because of their ability to reroute some of their oil, they've been able to avoid, shutting down fields completely, and they've been kind of gradually bringing down the volumes from different fields around the country. That is easier to bring back up more quickly. For things like petrochemicals, fertilizers, once you see refineries shut down, and in some cases we have seen that as a precaution when we have drone and missile strikes. Once they have to completely restart after shutting down, again, that is probably something that takes weeks. So on the whole, we're probably looking at months in order to get back towards any sort of normality. And that is, as you say, in the best case scenario.
Cornelia, if we compare this with previous bad moments in economic history, the energy crisis of the 1970s, financial crisis of 2008, COVID, do you fear this could be worse?
But it is certainly worse than the oil crisis the two oil crises in the 1970s. I would compare it to COVID in terms of the amount of oil taken out of the system. But the difference is COVID was a demand shock. This is a supply shock. And demand shocks are easier to rectify because you can just then put the supply there. Here we have a supply shock. We have some degraded, as our colleague said, some degraded production facilities, especially Ras Laffan in Qatar. And so getting that up going again, we have shut in oil fields because there was no storage left, so you had to shut in the oil fields.
Okay,
so,
let me bring in.
Takes time.
Let me bring in Nikolay at the end if I can. Nikolay, is there a scenario that we face a global recession? I've heard some saying that a lot of the stock market gains in the last couple of years have been down to AI, that this could be the thing at the same time that bursts the AI bubble?
Well, partly yes, though we're still standing at the threshold of developing of intensification of the development of AI, and lots of hopes were connected to, for instance, the Gulf region as a supply of the LNG and those fuel that could back up the development of AI. But to stay positive in the last moment, I would like to say that we're still not standing on the threshold. The coin is still standing on the rim. We are not facing, we are not like in the doomsday scenario yet. So, for instance, even if we're talking about the damage of the Gulf infrastructure, in most cases, with the exception of Ras Laffan and Pearl GTL and some facilities in Bahrain, the repairment can be done quite fast. So if we see the war is over tomorrow, the recovery will definitely take weeks, maybe months. But if we see the continuation of this conflict, that's where, I would say, we will face those negative scenarios with negative consequences that we're discussing. And they are really serious.
Very worrying suggestions from all three of you about what might happen. But thank you very much to our guests today, Nikolay Kozjharnov, Torbjorn Soltvedt and Cornelia Meyer. If you missed any part of our discussion, perhaps you joined us a bit late, you can find the whole programme anytime you want on our website, aljazeera.com. We'd love to hear your views too. Go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or find us on X. Just look for @AJ Inside Story. For now, that's it from me, James Bays, and the team here. Al Jazeera's coverage of the war continues in just a moment.